Welcome to Challenges and Icons, where today I'm coming from the Barclays Accelerator, which is powered by Techstars here in East London, and I'm talking to Jon Bradford, who is the Managing Director of Techstars London. Well, founded in 2006, Techstars is the #1 startup accelerator in the world, providing seed funding and an intensive mentorship-driven program for the tech startup community. Not only that, it gives access to an amazing network of alumni and mentors to help build these companies. Techstars has hubs in 9 major cities, with the Techstars London Accelerator established in 2013 and is the first hub outside of the US. The team continues to add new initiatives to support its core business, with new launches such as Techstars Ventures 2014, a Series A fund investing in companies emerging from the Techstars ecosystem. And if he wasn't busy enough, Jon has also produced a successful book called Do More Faster, Techstars Lessons to Accelerate Your Startup. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Jon Bradford to Challenges and Icons. Welcome, Jon, to Challenges and Icons.
And thank you for coming along. I know you're here in the space here in Barclays. I hope we're going to have fun talking.
Well, I certainly do, because what you're involved in is a fascinating area in this world of fast-paced tech change, and I wondered if you could perhaps start by summing up what Techstars is and why it's been such a success in such a short space of time.
Well, actually, it's one of those long overnight successes. So Techstars actually started in Boulder, Colorado. For those that don't know, Boulder is about 100,000 people in flip-flops in the middle of the Colorado desert.
I've heard all about it.
And essentially, they started just over seven and a bit years ago. And essentially what it was a recognition that investment was changing. That historically, angel investors wrote checks, they gave a little bit of advice to support the teams that they invested in. But Techstars recognized that actually the advice was becoming increasingly more important. As the cost of doing a startup was decreasing, actually the advice that you were provided, the introductions, the networks that you could get introductions to, actually became inherently more valuable. And actually that's a long-term trend, not just in digital businesses, but in lots and lots of different businesses. And so we started in Boulder, we quietly did our thing, did it really well for 2 or 3 years, and then expanded into Boston and Seattle, and then subsequently into New York. I joined just over 2 years ago to become the very first international program. And in that intervening period, when I joined, there was about 5 or 6 programs. There are now 18 programs. Oh. And of those 18 programs, 4 of them actually exist outside of the US, having had none just over 2 years ago. Wow. So I would, if I was talking in tech terms, I'd say we've probably hit product market fit. Having been quietly good at what we did in the past and suddenly recognizing where the value was, we've kind of pushed on. Now, I get told off for this internally, but I would probably suggest if you move forward a couple of years, the speed at which we're growing, it wouldn't be a surprise to see possibly twice as many programs again, of which almost half of them I personally think could be overseas. So I think we are on a long-term trajectory, which is entrepreneurship is not a monopoly to the Valley. It's a global phenomena that's happening everywhere. And I think it's a long-term change in the market itself. I'm on record of thanking the bankers in the financial services industry of blowing up the system in 2007, because I personally don't think we would be here today if that hadn't happened before. So I think this growth phase has existed and does exist because of the need to go back to basics and actually start to think about building businesses that actually generate and create real value and wealth.
Right. So really, it's this new way of helping companies through being an accelerator, as opposed to say VC money, is on a path for exponential growth. That's what you're suggesting, and that's what we're certainly seeing at the moment. So, what would you say are the values and challenges that sit around running a successful accelerator program?
So, I think there's two things we tend to be obsessed about. One is quality. We've always erred on the side of remaining small. We never have more than 10 or 11 teams in any given program, and we are highly bespoke and completely obsessive about delivering real value for the startups which go through our programs themselves. The other thing that we strongly believe is the core platform on which Techstars exists is the mantra, which is give first. Our expectation is that our mentors come along for free and support the teams. We have investors who give freely of their time. They also invest into the program itself to make the program itself happen. And essentially the notion that you actually, by helping others, you end up ultimately helping yourself, but there may not be a direct relationship between the here and now and that happening. So we have built entirely a culture of don't ask, just help. And we think that in the medium and long term that actually are hugely beneficial, and it's good business practice.
Yeah, I mean it's exactly. It seems very social at its very sort of DNA, and the quality is there. I mean, your selection criteria is apparently legendary in terms of sort of the rigor that you put against selecting tech companies into the program.
Yeah, I mean, on that, we actually are very, very founder focused. So I have my base criteria for selecting there's 5. Essentially, it's team, opportunity, and team. And essentially, at such an early stage, we are so inherently reliant on the individuals and the participants and the team that comes together to make it happen, that actually that's all we spend our time really thinking our way through.
Great. Well, it's and no wonder you have such a kind of a wealth of companies or startups that want to come and try and be part of the program.
Yeah.
So, is it all about attraction to you, or do you employ marketing strategy or creative tools to build awareness around what you're doing, or is it really word of mouth that is making it such a success at the moment?
So I think it really comes down to the latter part. So the thing that I talk about is one of my primary internal targets is something called a Net Promoter Score, which we completely obsess around. And what we do is actually at the end of the program, 4 weeks post that, we survey all of the founders that have been through the program and ask them one question, which is, would you recommend participation in Techstars? For those that don't know, a Net Promoter Score essentially is a weighting process whereby you score from 0 to 10. If it's a 9 or a 10, it's a positive score. If it's a 7 or 8, it's a neutral score, and if it's 6 or below, it's negative.
So you're setting the bar high.
So we set the bar high. On average, across all of our programs, we're achieving something around 80%. If a team or a founder scores 6 or less, my boss in Boulder actually phones the founder personally to ask them about their experience. So we become obsessive about the quality and the service that we deliver to the founders and every single founder that goes through the program. So it's not the rock stars that end up going off and making lots and lots of money. We select 10 teams, and we're there to help 10 teams in their entirety. And it's those guys that when questions are asked of like, should I go and do this program? They become ultimately our advocates of, is Techstars a great program? So to give you some context, Techstars itself, while it has 18 programs running, and we've probably got about 75 staff at the minute, over the last 7 years, we have now supported in excess of 600 teams, of which we've got 2,000 entrepreneurs. And so the 2,000 entrepreneurs are actually our voices in the market and in the network. And it's those guys that we actually want. So a lesson that I learned quite early was good PR was when other people talked about you.
Yeah.
And so we strongly believe that actually it's the advocates, it's the participants in the program are the voices to which we actually support and recognise going forward.
Yeah, well, it's very clear that once you start getting into the tech community, just how clear your reputation is in that market for fostering great entrepreneurial talent. And moving on to that, part of the people that I've interviewed in this program, they've come from some of them have come from a sort of a classic entrepreneurial go it alone kind of mentality, and they've built very successful businesses. But really what you represent is a much more collaborative approach to building success. Do you really feel that is going to be the de facto business model of the future?
Yeah, I think there's two things which have happened there. A lot of the mentors that we have are the people you've described, and every man or woman to a person will come back and say, I wish I had had this when I was starting my business. Because actually being an entrepreneur is actually a really lonely existence. And the example I give is we're in the space here where we work from, and actually what we do is we make entrepreneurship the most normal and common thing in the world. And people stare out the window and go, look at those strange people, they work for other people. And so you actually want to try and turn the whole thing slightly upside down. So I genuinely think there is a change happening in the wider sense, which is people are becoming much more accustomed to actually thinking about starting their own businesses as opposed to I'll leave university and go and join a corporate. So I think those are the things that kind of we spend our life focusing and fixating around.
Yeah, well, it's clearly a market for it.
Yeah.
So the ability to adapt and change and seek out the right sort of financial and mentor or advice, is this what makes us a great entrepreneur?
I think there's many different common traits. I think I've heard people talk about persistence as being a key entrepreneurial trait. Actually, when you look at the data, it basically splits in half, and it basically says 50% of persistent people actually go on to be successful, and 50% of people who are persistent go on to be failures. So you can actually argue it either which way. I actually think persistence is actually one of those key elements, but I think being flexible in your thinking is really important. I think being optimistic is also important. I mean, if there was a kind of a list that basically said if you do all of the following things, you will be an incredibly successful entrepreneur, I think that's not entirely true. I think if there was one common element is one's ability to attract smart people to come and work with you, I think is probably one of the key elements. Because no single entrepreneur in their own rights is ever going to turn into a multinational business. It's all about teamwork, and it's all about building teams around you. And I see that like leadership. I see there's many different forms of leadership that ultimately can be successful. So I think in the same way, it's hard to argue there's a single, here's a baseline traits of an entrepreneur. Everyone has their own way.
Yeah, but I would agree with the point about persistence. I think having a sort of having a vision and sticking to it is whether you're in the sort of the tech world or a product world or another area. Persistence is usually one of the kind of those key ingredients, I think.
It's interesting because this is a topic which is coming up a lot in discussions in my space, which is because we're in what I call an upcycle, and it's very buoyant, and there's lots of startups and there's lots of money around. What I've seen, and it was interesting because I was having a discussion with my boss about this over the weekend, was actually entrepreneurs skipping between startups, almost like shiny balls on a Christmas tree, which is it's like, oh, there's a bigger glittery one over there.
Yeah, let's go over there and have
and
a look
actually that kind of determination and persistence is actually harder to find in the market at the minute when there's so many glittery things around you at the minute, and actually being able to attract talent and retain talent in an environment like this actually helps to define you as an entrepreneur as well.
Great. Okay. So in our research, we were around Techstars. An interesting fact that we just were interested to get your view on whether it's true or not was whether or not it's true that Techstars came to London by way of lobbying from the UK government and Tech City to come here. Is that true?
Actually, the irony is there's a kind of it's not a yes and it's not a no. So was there direct lobbying from the government for Techstars to come here? No. Did Techstars come to London because of the things that the government were doing? Absolutely. I think what's really interesting about the current government policy when it comes to startups is actually their lack of money. So historically, governments have always tried to work with startups and write checks or do something to subsidize. There used to be a thing called Business Link.
Oh yeah,
which was well known and not very highly regarded, whereby you could pay an advisor who had no experience in the topic area you wanted to come and do it. What's interesting is government over the last 5 years has actually structurally made changes through policy decisions, which I think it's done very well. And part of that is it's listened to many of the members of the community, but it's through the policy change that a lot of the things that have happened, not necessarily by writing checks and big checks all over the place.
Okay, so in a way, you saw the market, the government was being part of facilitating change, and here we have this kind of fantastic sort of success story where we're sort of literally breeding entrepreneurs.
I could add to that. I mean, the reality is Techstars up to that point was a US-centric business. It recognized that it needed to no longer be a US-centric business. It recognized that entrepreneurs came from many different places around the world.
Yeah.
And actually, of all of the places it could have gone, it felt that London was the most natural hub and location outside of the US for entrepreneurial growth.
Okay.
So that came about from the environment and many other different factors, and government were part of that.
Okay, so a mix of things all coming together at the same time to fuel growth.
Yeah. Welcome to the East End of London.
Yeah. Somebody's in trouble.
It is Tech City nonetheless.
Bring in Techstars.
Just to prove we're not sitting in some expensive hotel
Indeed.
in the West End of London.
Yeah, well, it's clearly a very energetic environment we've got here. So now let's talk about the future of innovation and changing business. How do you see future tech innovation shaping your own business growth and development?
So I described the geographical change in Techstars over the last couple of years. So I described there were 5 or 6 programs, there are now 18, of which 4 are outside of the US, and there are more to come. What's also interesting underneath all of that is, of those 18 programs, 9 are programs we run jointly with corporates. And actually historically there's been very dismissive of corporates can't do innovation, they don't understand it, they're not interested. They have historically, when they tried to work with early stage businesses, squashed them. I describe sometimes out of love than anything else, but they can't help themselves. They're like this huge organization of, like Barclays by way of example, is 150,000 people. Techstars is 75. They struggle to work with small businesses. And so what we've recognized in our initial program, we worked with Microsoft and then Nike and then RGA. And through that process, we've suddenly recognized that corporates have something to bring to the party, which is they have deep industry knowledge of how markets work and the customers and all of the things associated therewith. And so actually being able to blend those two things, I think, are incredibly valuable. So bringing the spark of innovation and novelty, which young entrepreneurs, and young I mean at heart rather than by age, and actually combining that with the will and the network and the support structures that a large corporate can bring, actually can create really interesting dynamics. And I think we would take, coming to your question, we would say, looking forward over the next couple of years, I think we will continue to run our programs such as Techstars Berlin and London, which are very broadly focused. But I believe that actually there are more opportunities globally in very specific sectors with the right partners in many, many different locations, whether you call that ag tech, whether you call that space travel, whether you call that fintech. The internet has profoundly changed many different industries in many different ways. And so being able to get to all of those is really hard, but finding the right corporate partners is a very good way of starting that journey.
Sure. That's interesting because, in the past I've sort of talked about the great sort of corporate innovation swindle, and where, thousands, sometimes millions get spent on innovation and nothing ever gets to market, But what you're saying is that actually find the right corporate partners, the right people, again, quality of people, combined with, the Techstar accelerator or accelerator community can actually produce fantastic results in the future. And why not? That's great.
Correct. I think I was having a conversation with someone this morning. I think one of the interesting things is in the world that I exist in around investment is we go through cycles. There are up cycles, there are down cycles, but typically over a 7-year period, it's generally upwards. I actually fundamentally believe that corporate innovation is going through a structural change. And part of what we do, and we work with corporates, is one of the pieces that will help make that happen. It's not the only piece, but how corporates look to change and the way they seek to innovate themselves is being questioned at all levels through organizations. And I think that as a long-term theme and trend, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, me too. I'm very optimistic about growth for the future. And in a number of times during this interview, you talked about the upcycling that's going on and exponential growth. And of course, that is, that can always be a kind of concern to people who think, well, there's no such thing as exponential growth these days. But you're clearly a very positive sort of mindset. So this idea of speed of innovation and mentorship and working in a fast way, can that also mean failure? And if so, in a positive sense?
So I think you can look at it in one of two ways. Historically, what happened was corporates would come to third parties to help them support some innovation. Typically, it required a rather large check, and typically at the end of it, on the balance of probability, it may work, but more often than not, it may not. And at which point, the corporate would get very frustrated and annoyed because it felt that the magnitude of the check justified potential success at the other end. The way startups work and the world that I exist in is maybe there's easier ways to start to prove some of the theories or the voices in your head by writing smaller checks and to write broader number of checks. So in much the same way that historically I used to be a VC, I used to write checks of about £150,000. And my thesis was, which was what Techstars was talking about, was why don't I write 10 checks for 15 and test over a short period of time which ones there may be something there or there may not be something there. A proportion will work and a proportion won't. Now, because the amounts you're spending are relatively small at that point in time, nobody gets upset to the same degree. And actually, one can look at when things don't work out as a learning experience and to say, actually, we now know more about that market and why what we tried didn't work. So if we had to do that again, what would we do different? But I think part of it is a combination of, you're right, cultural change, which is, guess what, sometimes things don't work. Get over it, but learning from it. But the secondary part is maybe you don't need to spend as much. Maybe projects don't need to be 3 years. Maybe there are things that can be done in shorter time bursts. And all you're trying to do is not try to get to the end product, but prove something which gives you enough data to make a decision about, do you want to go on and invest? I think this personally actually sets real challenges actually to consulting businesses and people who have historically worked with corporate innovation, because they actually historically have gone, I need to be satisfied that there's enough money to keep me busy and occupied for 12 or 36 months to build this big grandiose project. The idea of them going to clients now and saying, well, let's do something for 90 days and then at the end of 90 days we'll figure out what we do for the next 90 days. that's, I think, similarly again, a structural change which I personally believe is going to happen in corporate innovation, and it's the people bringing the innovation and the consultants.
Yeah. Well, that's very inspiring, and certainly we're seeing that all over the place. And so let's just conclude now. Just sort of looking, staying with the future.
Yeah.
In this world of upcycling and sort of positive growth that you're describing, are there any challenges that you see, you're facing, that you are kind of, that are potential obstacles or challenges that you might want to take on and turn into a success?
Yeah, I think our single limiting constraint is we would like to be more places faster.
Okay.
And the constraint exists as a self-constraint because of this need to ensure that we deliver quality to all of the participants that participate. We strongly believe that more opportunities exist in more geographic locations, in more industries. And we touched earlier on off camera about IoT. Everything that we have done and what we do today, we consume the internet behind a screen. So everything we've done is a laptop, is a desktop, is a mobile phone. It's behind a piece of glass. And think of the impact that has had in a relatively low number of geographies behind a piece of glass. When you think about what I describe in front of glass, which is what IoT is, when the internet touches all the different parts of your life, I think the number of opportunities suddenly spring up in a whole different sets of ways. So when you think about it in 3 or 4 dimensions, and all of them are extrapolating in different ways, I think it just says to you that there are more opportunities for more people in so many different locations. And hence, that's why we feel that that's where our constraint exists.
Yeah, and make the world a better place in the meantime.
Oh, all of it is, and actually we get to reinvent what the new world looks like along the way.
Well, I would say that is a great way to end the interview on a very positive note like that. And just wish you continued success, and look forward to seeing you and Techstars move into all these different geographies and continue to foster the entrepreneurial and challenger spirit. Thank you very much, Jon Bradford, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Cheers.
Okay, thank you.